Okay, we begin here. You probably haven't heard the name Brittany Hill, and if you have, you certainly haven't heard it as often or as loudly or accompanied with as much performative grief as a name like George Floyd or Michael Brown. But the video of her death at the hands of Chicago gang members, a video which came to my attention this weekend, though it's been online for over a year, is impossible to get out of your head once you've seen it. The footage captured by a police surveillance camera, I'll just describe it to you. It shows Hill standing near her car talking to two men. She's holding her 1-year-old daughter in her arms. When the car with her killers rolls up slowly, Hill's daughter actually innocently smiles and waves to the men inside, of course not knowing what's about to happen. Moments later, they open fire. The two men standing with Hill take off in opposite directions. The men in the car stop, get out, continue shooting. Hill at some point is struck in the abdomen. She takes cover behind a parked vehicle and lays on top of her daughter, shielding her daughter from the gunfire. The killers drive away. 20 seconds later, one of the men who had been standing with Hill runs back into the frame, apparently holding a firearm, gets into his car and drives away with Hill still lying, bleeding on the pavement. 20 seconds after that, the other man returns with someone else, and the two place Hill in the backseat of their car, presumably to bring her to the hospital. And the 1-year-old girl stands up, watches as her mother is carried off. An older man then comes and picks up the child and takes her away. Now, I had originally planned to play the video of this crime on the show, but I've decided not to do that. You can go to my Twitter and watch it if you want to. I don't want to force you to watch it. I'm not going to just put it into the middle of this show, and it's seared into my brain now, and probably not for the better. I don't want to do that to you, but if you want to see it, you can. Now, the alleged perpetrators of this, as the judge correctly called it, chilling, mind-boggling, and utterly senseless crime, were arrested and charged with first-degree murder a short time later. Police say the shooting was probably some kind of gang retaliation, though they don't believe that Hill was the intended target. Maybe it was the men standing with Hill, I guess we can assume. This all happened over a year ago. Now, when it happened, it made some waves locally in the immediate aftermath, but it was quickly forgotten, even on the local level, it seems. Most people across the country never heard of it, even after the dramatic and gut-wrenching footage leaked to the public. It leaked to the public a year ago. There were no mass protests. There were no memorial services attended by politicians from across the country. No public officials weeping uncontrollably over her casket, as the mayor of Minneapolis did for George Floyd. And her casket, speaking of which, we can assume was not plated in gold like George Floyd's was, nor is her face like George Floyd's featured on murals all over the nation. No major corporations expressed their sorrow over her death. The Democratic Party didn't kneel in silence to honor her. Nobody rioted, nobody looted. Black Lives Matter didn't organize any demonstrations on her behalf. No liberal activists or politicians told us to, quote, remember her name. No laws were passed in response to her death. No calls for reform. No famous athlete said anything about her. Colin Kaepernick didn't say anything. Nothing. She just died and that was it. Another statistic, another tally to add to the body count. And as far as the body count goes, Hill's death last year followed a Memorial Day weekend in Chicago that saw 38 shootings and 5 deaths. Over the weekend, she was one of 490 murders in the city that year. There have been over 420 homicides already in 2020 in Chicago, a year that has seen the most violent day in Chicago in over half a century. 18 homicides on one Sunday in May. But none of these murders, or any of the hundreds of other murders that happen in our cities every year, provoke outrage or garner attention, even remotely on par with the killings of George Floyd, Michael Brown, Freddie Gray, etc. Now, the point I'm making here has, of course, been made many times by many people, and for good reason. It's an important point. But those who seek to justify this disparity in coverage and outrage and attention have a number of responses at the ready. So I want to address the two most common rejoinders to this argument that I'm making right now, the point that I'm making. Number one, they'll say, well, in cases like Brittany Hill, the murderers are arrested and brought to justice, so there's no need to protest. It's true that in the specific case of Brittany Hill, the murderers were arrested and charged, thanks in large part to the fact that they happened to commit their crime in full view of a surveillance camera. But a great many murders in Chicago and elsewhere go unsolved and unprosecuted every year. Besides, George Floyd's killer was also arrested and brought to justice. That, you may have noticed, has done nothing whatsoever to quell the protests. The killing of Michael Brown was investigated on both the local and federal level, and both investigations, to include the investigation conducted by Obama's DOJ, cleared the officer of wrongdoing, citing, among other things, eyewitness testimony and forensic evidence proving that Michael Brown was shot while in the process of attacking the officer and trying to kill him, trying to disarm him. This was proven. But this also did nothing to satiate the protesters. Still to this day, they repeat the thoroughly and repeatedly debunked lie that Brown had his hands up and was pleading for his life. You hear this even from the protesters, the George Floyd protest. They still repeat this hands up, don't shoot thing. The actual outcome of these cases seems to matter very little or not at all to the protesters. So that excuse doesn't work. The second excuse you hear is, the protesters are speaking out against injustice in government. They're seeking certain legal and policy changes. And citizen-on-citizen murder is not a matter of governmental injustice, and there's no need to call for changes to law or policy in response to it, as the argument goes. Now, as covered above, the problem with this response is that the protesters are often upset about things that do not amount to governmental injustice. Michael Brown was not a matter of governmental injustice. The vast majority of police shootings are not unjust. Even the majority of police shootings of unarmed suspects are not unjust, as I have previously showed. We talked about it on the show last week. But even if this is about injustice or perceived injustice, that would be all the more reason to take to the street for the sake of the Brittany Hills of the world. These crime-plagued cities have been brought to their knees by decades of ineffectual and unjust democratic policy. The epidemic of violent crime in places like Chicago is most certainly the result, at least in part, of bad laws and bad leaders who, for a start, have facilitated the collapse of the nuclear family by cynically breeding dependents on welfare and other nanny state programs. Also, many of the killers who terrorize these communities have already been convicted of multiple violent felonies, and yet they're still on the street. They are filtered again and again through the court system and prison system and then back into the community until they finally do something so incomprehensibly heinous that there's no choice but to send them away for good. There was a case we talked about last week. 3 friends in Florida were executed in cold blood by a man who had over 200 felonies, 15 convictions, and 2 stints in state prison already under his belt. This was a man who long ago announced that he is uninterested in becoming and being a productive member of civilized society. But he had to write that message in the blood of 3 dead men for the courts to finally take him at his word. Injustice? Yes, there is quite a lot of injustice fueling the chaos and bloodshed in our streets. The excuses don't hold up. You know, a movement that was really concerned with the unjust killing of innocent lives would be eager to stand up for Brittany Hill, to speak up on her behalf, to say her name. And certainly a movement that claims to defend the dignity and value of human life would have quite a lot to say about Brittany Hill and the many hundreds of victims like her each year. Because for all the grief I give BLM, the fact is that life matters is a message that our culture desperately needs to hear. I agree with that. It's a message that, if it was listened to and heeded, would save many lives, would probably have saved Brittany Hill's life. It's just a shame that the movement which claims to defend life, Black life specifically, seems in practice to care very little for it. And that's the issue. It's very clear that in many of these communities, you have people like the killers of Brittany Hill. As I said, they weren't even targeting her. They were going after someone else. The fact that she was standing there and was holding her child meant nothing to them. They didn't care. To them, her life literally meant nothing. There's almost something. It's in a way, it's almost more chilling that she wasn't being targeted because of the indifference in it. Okay, a crime motivated by hatred, someone going to kill someone, a jilted lover or something killing someone. It's a horrible thing, terrible. But that's something that you can comprehend. You can contextualize that. Okay, someone killing out of hate and anger and jealousy. All right, people have been doing that since time immemorial. But when you find these kinds of killings, like you do so often, especially in the cities and these communities, crimes of just indifference. Now, I don't hate you, nothing against you. Your life just means nothing to me. I don't care. The life of your child that you're holding means nothing to me. I feel like killing these other two guys for some pointless beef. And you're in the way, so I'm just going to shoot you too. Whatever. You know, though that crime is motivated by a total indifference to human life. So life matters. Yes, Black life matters. All life matters. That is an important message. Those killers, tell them that. That's where the message needs to be. But these are exactly the cases that BLM, Antifa, the left ignores. Thank you for tuning into the Daily Wire, one of the fastest growing conservative media outlets in the entire country. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a like and a subscribe to our YouTube channel so you don't miss out on any of our content.